Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Well, welcome everyone to the Mental Healthy Podcast. I'm glad to have you with us here today. I've got a great guest here today with us. I know you're looking forward to hearing him. I'll do a quick intro here for him. It's Dr. Karl Benzio. He's a board-certified Christian psychiatrist. He's got over 35 years experience in the field. His primary ministries is he's a co-founder and chief psychiatric officer of Honey Lake Clinic in Florida. And he's also the medical director of the American Association of Christian Counselors. And on a personal level, he's married to his best friend, has 3 daughters and 1 granddaughter. So welcome to the podcast, Karl.
Hey, since that bio, we actually had a second granddaughter about 10 weeks ago. So, yeah.
Really? Well, congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yep. All doing healthy. So we're blessed. Yep.
Well, good. Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you being on the podcast today. I know you through AACC and then some other connections we have. And you're known around the country as being a Christian psychiatrist. I mean, not just a psychiatrist, but a Christian psychiatrist. And I know a lot of people may not get that. So why don't you just begin and tell us a little bit of maybe how did you become a Christian psychiatrist?
Yeah, ever since I was 5 years old, God laid on my heart decision making. I was always one of those why kids, curious kids. Why do we do what we do? Why do people make the decisions they make? And God just laid on my heart decision making. I didn't really know that it was a psychiatrist that was one of the people that in that space, or that psychological space. But I watched I Dream of Jeannie, Bob Newhart show, MASH, saw some psychiatrists in those shows, and started to, okay, maybe that's the person. Then in second grade, our Sunday school teacher said to us, we went around the class and she goes, hey, if you had one wish, what would you wish for? We went around the class. I said, peanut butter milkshakes and baseball cards was my wish. And she goes, well, in the Bible, there's a place where God's a genie. And we're like, oh my, this is like blasphemy. How dare she say something like that, right? And she goes, well, she opens up to 1 Kings and tells us the story of Solomon. Had one wish. What would he wish for? And she says wisdom or godly decision-making. And so being that decision-making was placed on my heart, that sort of resonated. It's like, wow, boy, that's what Solomon wished for. And then the next verse is God was pleased and gave him everything else. Mm-hmm. So then the $6 Million Man came out when I was a teenager. And I thought, wow, if we could build a bionic brain, we could figure all this decision-making process out. And I was, born in 63, in the 60s, 70s, computers were still these huge things, weren't quite in, everyday households or classrooms, but you were sort of moving in that space, and artificial intelligence and, all the sci-fi movies. And so, boy, if we can make a bionic brain, we could figure it all out. And so I went to Duke University, majored in biomedical engineering with focus in central nervous system imaging, then went to medical school, psychiatry residency. But also when I was a teenager, we listened to this one pastor who we lived in the DC area, and we went to these thing called taper churches. And they were these kind of churches where somebody got up, led some praise and worship songs, somebody did announcements, and then there was no pastor. We met at like a high school. So we took out like an 8-track cassette tape player and popped in a tape, and we listened to this pastor from the Dallas area. And he started talking about the Bible and sort of unpacking the Bible in a way that allowed me to apply it to my daily life. And to me, that was the first time that I ever really heard. I always thought the Bible was this incredible history book, or here's what's going to happen at the end of times and in heaven. But I never really heard it 1963 when I die, sort of applied there. And he didn't have any psychological or medical, but he was just really unpacking scripture in this very psychologically deep kind of way. And I thought, wow, if somebody could do that, but also had psychological or medical understanding and expertise of our brain, that would be an incredible resource. And so my desire to then combine those two, to have that kind of opportunity and provide that kind of service to the church, so that we can really equip Christians to be salt and light, and then to help show other people that, hey, this Bible way is really the best way. That just sort of led me on my journey of integrating faith and science together. Decision-making sciences sort of became my specialty, and I've been able to do a lot of things nationally, work with a lot of different organizations. There's not that many Christian psychiatrists, so God has opened up a lot of doors to work with Christian Medical and Dental, AACC, Liberty. I'm on the board of the Global Center for Flourishing, many different conferences and interviews like this, but also to go around the world, Kenya, Uganda, Iraq, Poland, and work in that legislative space too, about protecting our right to freedom of speech, right of conscience to deliver services from a biblical worldview and also teach from a biblical worldview. So it's been a beautiful integration of science and faith that has allowed me just tremendous opportunity as a Christian psychiatrist.
That's great. Now, it's funny. I know as people listen to you, they go, man, this guy's a psychiatrist, and in the mental health field, you're sort of at the top of the pecking order and all that. But I've heard you tell your testimony before that you haven't always been at this point in life, that you have a little bit of a personal story that built up to where you are today. And I know you like to share that sometimes. So give the listeners a little bit of your background and what led you personally to being where you are today.
Yeah, so professionally, it's been unbelievable since my 30s and on. But before that, a little more different, and you'll sort of see how it integrates with my pursuit of wanting to be a psychiatrist. When I was 4 years old, I was a very bad stutterer. I started kindergarten at 4, but I was a poor stutterer. I could read really well, comprehension. I was put in a 3rd grade class, and with older kids, I just got bullied, got hit in the back of the head, made fun of, called names, pushed around by those bigger kids in 3rd grade. So always wondering, well, why are people doing this to me? Why are they making these kind of decisions? That's sort of part of why I was interested in decisions and God put that on my heart. As a kid, we also moved around a lot, moved in a bunch of different states. And when you move, you make friends, but then you lose friends. You make friends and lose friends. And finally, you're like, well, why even make friends? We're just going to move and lose those friends. And I don't want to go through that grief or that sadness. I played sports, was very good in sports, did things on a national level when I was 12, 13 years old. That allows you to sort of make friends quickly, but yet I was never in that inner circle. And as a guy, you sort of want to be in that inner circle. And with that recognition of sports and being in the news and stuff, I was a lot of pressure for that attention of those peers. That just escalated through junior high and into senior high, and started drinking, using other drugs, a lot of poor decisions, and went to college, lost a baseball scholarship, lost an Air Force ROTC scholarship, almost got dishonorably discharged from the Air Force, got caught cheating on a math differential equations test and got put before the academic review board, got put on academic probation, almost flunked out of school, almost got kicked out for other behaviors, ended up with Duke University Medical Center with a blood alcohol level greater than 0.5 on 3 different occasions. God just gave me the really good gift of test taking. So I scored really well in the MCATs, didn't get into the medical schools that I wanted, but I got into my home medical school in New Jersey. I got on the waiting list though. And so a couple of days I'm waiting. I went to get in medical school, and I'm waiting. And 2 days before the semester started, the registrar's office calls and says, "Karl, it's a miracle." I'm like, "What do you mean it's a miracle? You've been giving me bad news all year." She goes, "Well, we've never gone this low on the waiting list before, but we've got your number. Are you still interested in coming?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is all I've ever wanted to do." So she says, "Can you afford it?" I said, "Well, hook me up with the student loan office. I'll get loans to be able to come." And so I got into medical school. So in my mind, I was thinking, wow, everything that I've done has gotten me to where I want to be. So I can just continue to do what I was doing. And so my situation got even worse, drank even more, a lot of other inappropriate decisions and gambling and promiscuity and pornography and nudie bars. Ended up getting DUI and eventually getting arrested for 6 counts of felony aggravated assault and in jail. And it was in jail that God spoke to me and said, "Karl, you made me your savior when you were a little kid." And I did. I answered many an altar call. I mean, who wants to burn in hell forever kind of thing. But you never made me the Lord of your life. If you make me the Lord of your life, I'm going to teach you things about decision making, which is what I've been pursuing for those 20 years up to that point. I'm going to teach you things about decision making that are going to renew your mind, transform your life, and help you transform other people's lives. And when I ever heard Lord, I heard authority. When I heard authority, I heard author. And when I heard author, I realized that I'd always thought I was the one who was most qualified to write the "How does Karl get the most out of life" instruction manual. I love me more than anybody else does. I care for me. I know my weaknesses. I know my stutter. I know my deficits. I know my fears, my anxieties. I know my skills. I know my strengths. I know my future. I know my desires more than anybody does. So there's nobody more qualified to write that "How does Karl get the most out of life" instruction manual than I do. But whenever he said Lord, authority, author, I realized that he's the one who's way more qualified than me to write that book. And he did. It's the best instruction book for living every day, the Bible. And to me, that's the greatest decision-making textbook. It's the greatest psychiatric textbook that's ever been written. And so over a 3 or 4 year process of being in therapy, going to the Bible and taking a look at, well, I wanted to study decisions and understand decision making. So let me go to Jesus's decisions. He's the perfect decision maker. And so that's where I started to unpack that. That was helpful in my life, and marrying the two. Here's these faith and spiritual biblical principles about life management, and then here's psychological principles and expertise about life management. How do you blend those together? And that's sort of that 3 or 4 year process that came out of my terrible functioning and distress. And God brought my wife into my life, who just loved me uncontrollably and was very forgiving of many mistakes and stupidity that I had displayed over the years. And he brought 3 girls to me, and I never imagined myself with a dad with girls. I thought I was going to have guys, and we were just going to go around. I'd have 5 boys, and we just go around the country playing basketball against other father-son teams. So he gave me daughters to bring out that more sensitive, softer side, and more compassionate. And so my anger, dissipated over the years with my wife and my kids, and the things I was learning, and how the Bible and the Holy Spirit were just working in me. And with that, it's allowed me to be an encourager to many others, and to parents that have kids that are struggling. And oftentimes they'll say, well, I don't want to report them for forgery or stealing our car. Well, why not? Well, because they might go to jail. I was like, well, I was in jail. And they're like, you were? Like, and you're still a doctor? Like, yeah, every 3 years I have to fill out the DEA, my DEA license, and I have to list that felony charges in the past, and there's paperwork and stuff I have to submit, but it's never blocked me from doing anything. If God's going to promote you, there's nothing that can stop that. And if the world promotes you and God doesn't, there's nothing that's going to allow you to succeed in that space. So just for all those out there that, are struggling with various different things, everybody, there's a great comeback story that God has written for everybody. And if we're willing to walk in that and humble ourselves to following his instruction manual instead of trying to write our own, as I tried to write mine. Well, that chapter didn't work. I'd rip it out. I'd write another one. That didn't work. Rip it out, write another one. And finally, you just sort of get sick of that. In jail, you have nobody else to blame it on but you. And that was my come to Jesus moment.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I mean, I think you're right. It does encourage people to hear that, these guests on the podcast who are like these hot shots in whatever field or whatever, that you've been through some junk as well. And I think it does encourage people that you can go through low spots and still turn out okay. And I mean, I relate to part of what you're saying too. I used to stutter really bad as well. Mm-hmm. And now I do lots of public speaking like this all the time. And God does allow us to come through those things and then succeed in the areas where you had failed previously.
Exactly. It's unbelievable. His grace is amazing. But then how he takes sort of what the world or what Satan intends for evil, and he's able to use it to empower us and heal us, but then allow us to use that to help others in their healing journey is, beyond my wildest imagination and dreams. Just so blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me turn the corner here a little bit. I know you work, full-time in psychiatry, and I know depression and anxiety are huge today, but let's go with anxiety for a second. I mean, I know we live in a really stressed out world, and there's so many emotions all over the place. Give the listeners a feel for how can you help us understand our emotions, especially like our quote unquote negative emotions. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, as a kid growing up in the 60s, macho kind of time, I was taught as a kid, hey, look, if you have anxiety, if you have sadness, depression, worry, fear, jealousy, anger, any of those kind of emotions, loneliness, that you're weak, you're a wuss, you'll get taken advantage of, you'll be manipulated, don't show those things, cover them up, right? And then as you sort of read the Bible, though, you realize that, wow, God had a lot of these kind of, half the Old Testament, he's angry and jealous, and he feels forsaken, he feels abandoned. The Holy Spirit grieves. Jesus wept. There's all these what we call negative emotions. I like to call them uncomfortable because they're not really negative. There's a purpose to them. If God had these emotions, then they must not be bad. They must not even be sins, because sometimes we're even told that we're sinning when we just have that emotion. So to me, they're not positive, negative. They're comfortable or uncomfortable. And those emotions are really our warning system. So God is sort of designed, as an engineer, sort of see everything as a system. And there's this feedback loop, our emotions, that let us know when there's something going wrong, there's potential danger, or we're not seeing things clearly. We get these uncomfortable emotions that let us know, whoa, pay attention, like that, warning light on our dashboard. When it goes off, there's potential danger. Maybe something's going wrong. So we need to pay a little bit more attention, or sort of dig below the surface a little bit more to see, well, what really is going on inside of me or in my life. Unfortunately, what, as you see in our society a lot, we allow our emotions to become our decision-making system. They're terrible decision makers. but they are a nice part of our decision-making system, but we let them sort of overthrow command central and become the decision maker themselves. But emotions, they distort our ability to see things clearly. We even have sayings: we see red with anger, we see green with envy, or even love is blind. I mean, we've all made sort of some, pretty zany decisions whenever we're in love. So, they distort our ability to see things clearly. They don't let doctors operate on their own kids. Why? Because if I was in an intense situation, I wouldn't be able to see that situation clearly to be able to call upon my expertise, my training, my past experience in these surgeries. And I'd rather a total stranger operate on my kid that's totally unbiased and able to manage that situation well. Unfortunately, in our society, whenever we have these uncomfortable feelings, we often look at the feeling as the problem, not it's the warning sign of a problem. So that smoke detector, when it starts to go up, it's not the problem. The smoke, or the fire in the kitchen, that's the problem. I once had a patient, a little old lady, a little favorite of mine. She was late to an appointment one time, and she was never late. And I said, "Oh, Ruth, what's the matter? Everything okay? You're usually not late." She goes, "Yeah, I was just in an argument with my mechanic." And I was like, "An argument? Why? You're such a sweet nature. You never get in an argument with anybody. What were you arguing about?" And she goes, "Well, he wouldn't shut off that red light. I want him to shut off that red light on my dashboard because it makes me nervous." And he goes, "Ma'am, I can't shut that off. It's illegal. The state requires those lights to be on for your car to pass inspection because that's what warns you if there's a problem going on in your engine or your oil or whatever." And so our society gets so fixated on those uncomfortable feelings, we sort of look at those as the problem themselves, as opposed to looking below the surface to say, "Oh, well, thanks, warning system, for this anger, for this loneliness, for this frustration, for this feeling of overwhelmed or anxiety, fear, worry. What's below the surface that's going on psychologically and spiritually, or sometimes even medically, that's giving me those warning signs that I need to really take a much better and closer look at."
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like what you were saying too about people make decisions with their emotions and sometimes make foolish decisions. And I know I tell some of my clients sometimes you got to think with your brain and feel with your heart, not think with your feelings. Because if you're doing that, I mean, you're just all over the place, but that's what they do sometimes.
As an engineer, I kind of, I like to look at things in schematics. So I think of my brain as having two volume buttons. There's an emotional volume button and there's a thinking volume button. And to me, only Jesus could have them both cranked at the same time. So for the rest of us, and if you think there's 10 units total to parse out, if your emotions are at a 9 out of 10, then your thinking is at a 1 out of 10. Unfortunately, when we usually want to try to solve problems is whenever we have those uncomfortable feelings. So when our emotional volume is cranked out, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're agitated, we're overwhelmed. Well, that's when we want to jump in with a decision or a response. But if our emotional volume is 9, our thinking volume is 1, we're probably not going to come up with a very good option. We're not able to think clearly. And that's why players choke, right? So when the clock's ticking down, the score's tied, the fans are screaming, a lot riding on the game, emotional volumes start to go up, 8, 9, 10. Well, that's when the thinking volume is low, and a good quarterback is going to call timeout. And he goes to the sideline, and hopefully he has a good coach that speaks in a soft, calming, soothing, relaxing voice, like we see in the Psalms. The writer of the Psalm in the beginning, their emotional volume is at a high peak, but through the course of the Psalm, as they start to bring about that, past examples, experiences where God was faithful, where God soothed and relaxed them, or past victories that they had, now they're able to calm down. Then the coach says, "All right, here's the play. Here's what we practiced on. Here's what you're good at. Here's what the defense is going to do. All right, go get him, big fella." And now his thinking volume is able to rise because his emotional volume is low. We see the same in therapy, as we work with patients. When a patient's emotional volume is high and we're trying to teach at the same time, they're not able to take it in. We do want them to have some emotional intensity, but we also want to teach them how to soothe so that they're able to bring that down to maybe a 5, 4, or 3 to be able to have more thinking volume, to be able to process what we're working on. Sometimes when our emotional volume is high, as a therapist, countertransference and those kind of issues sort of come into play, and we're not really being able to think clearly, and we're allowing our stuff to enter in inappropriately to the situation, or we're not be able to manage their situation very well. And certainly when their emotions are high, that's where we need to be able to have our thinking volume to manage our emotions, to be able to then help them manage their emotional volume so that we can navigate that situation well. That's also why we want to train, because whenever we're able to train in those situations, like in the beginning of medical school, there'll be situations where I'm overwhelmed, my emotional volume is high, but as I put me in that situation over and over and over again, I'm so then presented with the same situation. Now my emotional volume doesn't go to 8 or 9 anymore. It goes to 2 or 3. I get a call from a suicidal patient, or there's somebody who's cutting, or, somebody comes into the emergency room with a knife at the nurse's neck. Well, now my emotional volume doesn't go up because I practiced, just like an actor will practice their lines over and over and over. So as therapists, people in, graduate school or training, that's why we want to go through repetition, and with our patients, go through that repetition with them so that they can have a lot better control over their emotional volume and have a much higher thinking volume when they're engaged in potentially disruptive situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, you're trying to help them make wiser decisions. And throughout today and previously times that I've heard you speak, and you talk about that, that one thing you've really developed in your life is this whole model and expertise in the area of decision-making sciences. Why do you think people struggle with making decisions and making wise decisions?
Yeah, so I've gone to speak to, thousands and thousands of people over the years, and I asked this question, who's ever had English class growing up? Everybody raises their hand in America. Who's had science class? Everybody. Math class? Everybody. Art class? 90%. Music class? 90%. Who's ever had a class in decision making growing up from K to 8? I've only had 8 people in the 30 years I've asked this question, hundreds of thousands of people. Only 8 people have raised their hand that K through 8 they had sort of the class where they were taught some of the mechanics of decision making. Nowadays we have AP psychology, and so we teach a little bit about the overview of decision making, but not the actual mechanics of decision making themselves. So most people don't really have a strategy. I think we just hope that when they graduate high school, the clouds will sort of part and the lightning bolt will come out of the sky and will bless them with decision-making skills. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. So most people are pretty random in their decision-making process, or they're pulling from all these different spaces. But whenever they're pressed upon them in a particular situation, it just flows out of their unconscious. And so the church doesn't teach us very much about the unconscious space. And our society does a little bit more than the church does, but still doesn't do a very good job of teaching us about the unconscious space. But yet at the Last Supper, Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, look, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And Peter's like, "Well, I'll never do that. In fact, I'll lay down my life for you before I did anything stupid like that, Jesus." But we know a few hours later in the courtyard, he totally chokes, right? His emotional volume is high, his thinking is low, he totally chokes. Well, why? Because there was a lot of stuff in his unconscious space. So even though in his conscious space, he knew that, hey, Jesus, you're my number one, most of our decisions are really driven by our unconscious stuff. And so we got a lot of stuff in there. A story I like to look at when I'm integrating faith and science is the story of Lazarus. Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha send messengers to Jesus. "Hey, look, you're a good friend. He's dying. We know you can heal people. Can you come?" It's like, "Well, I got stuff to do. I can't come right now." And unfortunately, he comes late. Lazarus is dead. He's dead 4 days. People are grieving, upset. And Jesus said, "Hey, roll back the stone." They roll back the stone. They're worried about the smell and everything. And Jesus said, "Lazarus, rise, come forth." A miracle. Lazarus is raised from the dead. The next thing Jesus says is to the people around Lazarus, "Unbind him." Well, why? Well, because Lazarus had these death wrappings wrapped around his face, around his body. They interfered with his perspective, his viewpoint, his sight, interfered with his freedom, his movement, his walk. He didn't tell Lazarus, "Unbind yourself." He told others to unbind Lazarus. Now, Lazarus has to steward that unbinding process. And to me, this is sort of a representation of us whenever we come into the world. We come to the world spiritually dead. And through Christ, the miracle of Jesus's death and resurrection and our belief in him as our Savior, we're raised from spiritual death to spiritual life. Miracle. We're a new creation. We have new potential. We have a new power source. Our sin slate is washed totally clean. But when we become Christians, our memory banks are not washed clean. We don't get a brain transplant. All those experiences, all those losses, all those hurts, those wounds are buried inside of us in various different files and storage. Some of them are pushed way deep. We try to push them and hide them as deep as we can, but we can never hide them all the way. They are always affecting our decisions in the present day, in some way or another. And I think as Christians and as the church, we often try to teach people, hey, from the point you accept Christ, you're a new creation, move on. You don't have to worry about all that. You got a brain transplant, which we really didn't. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. You're healed from all that stuff. All that stuff is gone and made new. But it really hasn't. We bring that in, and to me, those are our death wrappings, and we call them psychological baggage, right, in our space.
Mm-hmm.
And we all need some unbinding from our psychological baggage that has been wrapped around us ever since we're 1 day old, 3 days old, 2 months old. I look at my little grandkids, 1 year and, in 10 weeks, and there's stuff that's being stored in there from, even 25-year-olds have a hard time interpreting their situations totally accurately and truthful and looking at things clearly, let alone a 5-year-old that believes in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. So we have a lot of misinformation hidden down inside. And so that misinformation comes out to play. And I think that's what our society doesn't do a very good job of teaching, helping people understand. Obviously, it'd be nice as early as possible to know that there's stuff that's inside of us that comes out to play and affects our decisions, and how as parents that we can help be better interpreters or translators. When I do parenting seminars or workshops or teach on that, one role I tell parents is you're really the primary interpreter or translator of life for your kids. And so Satan wants to deposit lies and misinterpretations. Like I said, we moved around a lot when I was a kid. So we moved in second grade, and I'm the new kid on the block, and we go out on the play yard and I'm playing dodgeball, and I get picked last. I'm a pretty good athlete, but when you get picked last in a new place, the things that run through your mind is, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, dorky, I'm awkward, nobody's going to like me, I'm never going to make any friends, it's going to be a terrible school. Well, it would have been nice if a teacher came up to me and said, Karl, look, this is all this means today. That today, these 2 kids just picked other people to be on their team before you. That's it. You could have a blast today. You can make new friends. You could be the MVP of the dodgeball game and have a great game. You could go in and trade your Oreo for a chocolate chip cookie, make a new friend. You could crush the spelling test after recess. You could go home, have fun with your folks tonight. You could be invited to these kids' birthday parties in a couple of weeks as they get to know you. But no teacher comes alongside and expresses that. I didn't want to go home and tell my parents about my bad day because they've moved us for, a number of times, and I didn't want them to feel bad about this bad situation that I had in school. So all those misinformation, all those misinterpretations I have sitting in my unconscious space that are now going to affect my need for approval, my need for acceptance, my need to have people like me, and my need to excel in sports or in class to be able to win approval and to win teachers' attention and those kind of. And that's just all from baggage, right? That's all from misinformation. And I think that's a lot of what sort of pushes into our decision space that we're not very good in the church or in our society teaching people about that. I call it the essence space because it reveals the essence of who we are, that unconscious space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, all this decision-making model that we're talking about here, I know you've really codified this more, and you've developed an actual curriculum. And as I understand it, it's called the Spears decision-making model. Can you describe that a little bit to the listeners?
Yeah. So as I went through both my own unpacking my own life and trying to sort out, like, why am I making the poor decisions I am? Got into the Bible, started looking at Jesus' decisions, unpacking other psychological elements in the Bible, and then marrying that to the professional education I was getting in medical school and psychiatric residency. I saw that there's 6 elements in every single decision, and they occur in this same sequence in every decision that we make. We make anywhere from 300,000 to 600,000 decisions a day. A lot of them automatic, most of them from our unconscious space, but even our steps that we take, we have a choice with each step to veer off to the right or left or to keep going forward, even though they're sort of automatic to us as we do them. So they follow the same 6 elements, and they spell out the word Spears. So S is stimulus, P is perception, E is emotion, A is assessment, R is response, and S is summary thought. So S is stimulus. So that's the situation, anything that comes upon you that sort of demands a decision or needs a response to it. So any situation that happens in our life, and most situations are really neutral. It all depends on our perspective. Last night I just watched the Steelers play the Browns. The Steelers are my team. Say the Browns are your team, and the Browns win the game. We just both saw the same exact stimulus, but you have one response as a Brown fan. I have a totally different response as a Steeler fan to that, because we have different perspectives. We have different homes that we grew up in, different affinities, and different connections with our fathers or our brothers or those kind of things. So I always look at God as being the sovereign over everything. He doesn't allow things to come into our life. So these stimuli or these situations, he doesn't allow them to come into our life unless he has a purpose, either in his overt will or his permissive will. So trying to figure out, okay, well, whenever I have difficulty figuring out why is something in my life, why is a situation, I look at God as either the perfect teacher, the perfect parent, or the perfect coach, and me as the child, the student, or the athlete. And just like, those three authority figures, they bring nice things into our life, but they also bring challenges into our life and some pain into our life, because they know in order for us to grow, we have to experience some pain to push us, to help us see what we need to work on, what we need, what we struggle with, and how to move forward in that particular space to get the potential out of us that authority figure sees that we have. The second one is perception. So there's a situation. Now we have our lenses that we see it through. And that's where Satan is trying to distort, with lies, put smudges on our lenses so that we don't see things accurately. And that's where unconscious space has the most sort of play in our ability to see things. So whenever we're in a situation, we're now sorting through our database to figure out, well, what are all the things that I've experienced, I've been through, that I've learned, that help me understand what to do with this particular stimulus or situation that I find myself in. So we have our perception, then we have emotion. So we often think our emotions just come out of the blue, but they don't come out of the blue. Where there's a situation, we have a perception of it, that leads to an emotion. And so we have emotions that can run the gamut based on how we perceive that particular situation. Then we bubble up with an assessment of options. So we're going to assess the options. Now, for listeners, and what I realized in my life, usually the first option is me-centered, flesh-oriented survival, unless I've been in that situation over and over and over and have learned from it to be able to figure out, well, what's a more godly response to that? My usually initial response is, how do I save me? How do I survive this situation? How do I look for me and be selfish and self-centered in that particular situation? And so we really need to have that self-control over that initial urge and impulse, and then have patience to look at, well, let me work through a couple other options to sort of see. So the assessment phase, we're assessing options, and we're assessing them pros and cons, sort of based from a godly perspective of a situation versus a me perspective of the situation. Then we pull the trigger on a response. We make a decision, and then we have a summary thought. It's like, did that work? Should I do that again? And again, we're trying to look at this from a godly perspective. I told a lie. Wow. Hopefully we're not looking at that from, wow, I didn't get any consequences. Nobody knew. I got away with it. I got what I wanted out of it. Maybe I should lie more often. So that's where we get tricked in that me-centered now. I didn't have any pain. I got some pleasure, and I conserved energy. Those are our three primary motivators in the decisions we make. We want pleasure, minimal pain, and how do we conserve energy so I have energy for the next situation I'm involved in. So as I've taught that to many people, they find it slows down their mind. So good athletes can see a couple plays ahead, or the game slows down for them. And unfortunately, the good news is God gave us a powerful mind. The bad news is God gave us a powerful mind. So Satan wants to use that power against us. And whenever people understand, well, here's the mechanics of what my mind goes through whenever I'm presented with a situation, and as they practice that over the course of 2-3 weeks, now their mind starts to slow down for them. So instead of them being in a situation and blurting out a response, and then 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, like, oh man, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? Or boy, that was a stupid thing to think. Or like Peter, when he denied Christ, as he's walking away, he locks eyes with Jesus like, oh man, I really screwed up there. We can be in the moment and knowing, oh, here's what my mind goes through. It's sort of like pulling the hood up and sort of allowing us to see into the engine, how the engine of our mind works. And to me, that's just a very relieving and empowering opportunity and skill to allow people to see, to really just slow it down for them and allow them to be better stewards of that situation. So a lot of times we teach people decision making as it applies to being a spouse or a parent, or managing your finances, or why you should forgive, but we don't really unpack the mechanics of decision making. We just start, to me, at domino 15 and say, hey, we're assuming that you understand the mechanics of decision making. Now we're going to teach you how to be a better decision maker in your marriage, or with your finances, or with your kids. But when you skip over mechanics, into those first dominoes 1 through 15, the person isn't very equipped, and they keep on making a lot of the same mistakes because they don't understand, well, here's the role of my lenses, my perception, my emotions, here's where options come up, and this just really slows it down for people.
Yeah, definitely. I like that model. That really breaks it down pretty good. Well, let me turn a corner here again a little bit, and I when I think about you and the work you do and being a psychiatrist, a lot of listeners go, oh, he's one of those psychiatrists. He's one of those guys that just hands out tons of pills and all this. And they sort of paint you guys with a really broad brush, And I know for Christians too, I got a lot of Christian listeners to the podcast. Sometimes psychiatric medications are controversial, sometimes they're not. But what's your view on the use of medications? Like, what are the pros and cons, and what's the right way to use them?
Yeah, so very controversial issue, like you said.
Yeah.
Some places they're looked at as the cure. Some places they're looked at as pure evil and psychoheresy. And I think they really sort of fall somewhere in the middle. When I often speak about psychiatric medications, I'll ask the question, who knows somebody on a psychiatric medication, a close person, a loved one, or maybe yourself? And about 2/3 of the hands go up, 3/4 of the hands. And I said, well, who knows somebody who is on medications that shouldn't be on medications? And there's some hands that go up. And who knows somebody who's not on medications that should be on psychiatric medications? And then a bunch of hands go up. So, there's this, psychiatric medications are out there. They're one of the most frequently prescribed medication classes out there, especially the antidepressants, but there's not a whole lot of understood, or there's a lot of misunderstanding about them. So to me, I've been a psychiatrist for 35 years, coming on 36 years now, and I've been prescribing medications, and I've seen them be part of an incredible, miraculous transformation for people that really helps them turn the corner and access healing in incredible and powerful ways. To me, they're the sort of a miracle that God has given us in the natural world to help the natural defects that we have in our brain chemistry. But in all those years, I've never seen a psychiatric medication cure any psychiatric illness. So it's never cured anything. But what it does do, it improves decision making. It improves decision making in several different ways. One is it helps our perspective. So it helps us see our situations more clearly. So whenever a person is depressed, anxious, worried, confused, and obviously if there's psychoses or delusions, it's like having a storm cloud that is around your head and interferes with the way you see things. It's like doom and gloom or pessimistic. And so psychiatric medications can relieve that cloud and allow you just a little bit clearer perspective. It also relieve some of the symptoms that we have that interfere with our ability to think or to get up and to get out of bed, to have energy, to have focus, have concentration, have appetite, to be able to sleep and get normal sleep so that our brain is rested and processing things more clearly. Helps with impulsivity, mood fluctuations, anxiety, depression. So it helps with symptoms. It also helps with our emotions. So we're talking about that emotional intensity. When a person has a high emotional intensity, they're not able to think, or they're not able to work with their therapist as clearly, or go home and apply and think through those homework assignments that they maybe get from their therapist or their helpers or disciplers or mentors at church or whatever. And so psychiatric medications, they improve perspective, they decrease that emotional volume, they help with some of the dysfunction or distress that we have in our life, allow us to enjoy some things. They help us with some of those, the gamut of all these psychiatric symptoms. When we go through the review of symptoms for psychiatric symptoms, whether it's panic attacks or alcohol withdrawal or loneliness or depression or concentration focus. And so as we decrease those symptoms, now we allow the person to really work on the psychological and the spiritual aspects, either in their own Bible study, their own growth with God, their relationship with their therapist and what they're learning there. They're able to implement that, because as a therapist, we see our patients, 1 hour a week, maybe 2 hours a week, but yet those other 68 hours a week, they're on their own. So they need to be able to practice. So they need to be able to have energy, focus, concentration to be able to do those things. So to me, if the listeners out there can think of high blood pressure, so when a patient has hypertension, if we catch it really early, when the person's in their maybe 20s or 30s, a lot of times we don't need medications. We just say, hey, you need better skills at diet, exercise, nutrition, stress management, financial management, stop using drugs, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, get to bed on time, get 8 hours of sleep every night, have conflict resolution skills, forgiveness skills, parenting skills, marriage skills, communication, all those things. Work on those to decrease the stress in your life and manage the stress better, and your blood pressure will go down. Say we don't address it early and the person's blood pressure continues to progress over 10, 15, 20 years. Now they're starting to have headaches, blurred vision, chest pain. Well, we don't want them to have a stroke. We don't want them to have a heart attack. We know that those better decisions are the cure for their high blood pressure, but those better decisions are going to take 6 to 8 months, 12 months for them to learn, practice, for them to bear fruit in their life to bring their blood pressure down. So we don't want them, while they're practicing those skills and being better decision makers, to have a heart attack or stroke. So we say, hey, you need to do all these skills, but we're going to give you these blood pressure meds to bring down your blood pressure so you don't blow a stroke or have a heart attack. But you need to work on these skills, because if you don't work on these skills, we can give you one med, we can add a second med, we can have a third med, maybe even a fourth blood pressure med, but you're going to die of a heart attack or a stroke if you don't work on these skills. We never say, hey, take these blood pressure meds, but don't work on any skills. But it's, confusing to me as to how we'll say, hey, take this antidepressant, but then we won't push them to work on psychological and spiritual skills. We have this sometimes medical view that, hey, you were probably born with this genetic loading for depression. You probably have some relatives with it. It's in your genome. Just take this medication. It's a biological defect. This will patch that biological defect and you're fine. You don't have to work on any skills. We know that it's ludicrous to think of it that way, but that's sort of how sometimes we sort of address these psychological things. Therapists do a wonderful job working on the psychological and ideally the spiritual aspects of things, because those are the real curative elements that allow people to be a better godly decision maker, which through neuroplasticity rewires their brain, right? Recircuits their brain chemistry. The medication is a patch that we put on that chemistry while we're waiting. It buys time for us to wait for those psychological and spiritual interventions to affect decision making, right? And affect that unconscious space, and we become more regular godly decision makers. That affects our brain chemistry. Then we can start to chip away at those medications for most of the psychiatric disorders. There's some significant ones like maybe ADHD that last through adulthood for some people, or obviously bipolar and schizophrenia, or some that have significant biological defects that, regardless of what the psychological and spiritual interventions are, we haven't been able to overcome some of those biological bad circuitry that's come about for various different reasons. So for some of those situations, psychiatric medications are probably more of a lifelong endeavor. But for most people, we're able to come off if they're learning those skills and implementing those skills. So a lot of patients come into me and I'll say, well, what's your goal? And they go, well, my goal is to get off meds. I go, really? Tell me again, what's your goal? I was like, well, my goal is to get off meds. Been on them for 5 years, 8 years, whatever. I said, well, in the Bible, I don't really see that as a goal. I see the goal is to glorify God as much as possible, period. I don't say glorify God as much as possible, but without meds. So if I can glorify God 90% of the time on meds and 80% of the time off meds, I'm choosing to take meds because I'm called to glorify him as much as possible, period. There's a lot of things that help me glorify God. My wife helps me glorify God. My kids help me glorify God. A car helps me glorify God. My pillow, my bed, food in my fridge, all those things help me glorify God and equip my body and brain to be able to go out and do ministry. I don't say, oh, let's strip all those things away. I just want to do this all by myself on my own. But for some reason, we have this weird thought that these medications sort of control us, or they control our thinking, or they make us a different person. To me, I think that they just sort of allow that person that God has designed us to be a better chance for us to reach that potential with medication, but not as the cure, just buying us time, helping with symptoms while we implement the cure through their psychological and spiritual interventions.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that. That's much more of a nuanced, balanced approach to medications than just throw pills at everything and like some people say happens. But
whenever we're looking at people, whatever, if that medication that they're on is interfering with their ability to glorify God, it's interfering with their decision making. It's causing them to be spacey or be too tired or not be able to get out of bed or whatever. Hey, well, let's stop it. Our goal is to help you glorify God more, not glorify him less on medication. So let's tell your prescriber about that, the symptoms that you're having, the side effects that it's causing, and we can always switch to a different medication because with each class there's a number of different options and each person responds differently. So just because you're on a medication, don't hear from me that, hey, I got to stay on it regardless. No, we want it to help you glorify God, not to interfere with that. If you're having side effects that interfere with that, tell your prescriber so he can take you off that medication and get you on something that will help with your symptoms and help you glorify God more frequently.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Well, let me ask you this. I know you got your hand in a lot of different situations and a lot of different projects and all that, but your real bread and butter job is you're the co-founder and medical director of the Honey Lake Clinic down there in Florida. And I've heard you speak before about the uniqueness of the Honey Lake Clinic. So tell us about that. Tell us about your bread and butter job and why Honey Lake is unique.
Yeah, so Honey Lake Clinic is, I encourage people to go to the website just to sort of see the setting that God's blessed us with. We're in sort of rural Florida, North Florida. It's just very relaxing. We got it's a big campus that we have with a number of buildings, so it's not your sort of institutional psychiatric unit. as far as levels of care, we call them levels of care. There's inpatient, which is sort of a locked unit, maybe 3 to 5, 3 to 8 days length of stay. Not a whole lot of therapy goes on there. Usually that's for people that are very disrupted, either psychotic or suicidal or just really unable to function. So it's more safety warehousing to help them become safe to be able to go back home. And then therapy happens more intensively after that. Then there's outpatient therapy, which most people are aware of, and you go to a therapist once a week, every other week, maybe twice a week. There's intensive outpatient, which is maybe like 9 hours, 2 or 3 3-hour days a week. There's partial hospital program where you live at home and you go to a clinic maybe from 9 to 3, Monday through Friday. But the intermediate between inpatient and that partial hospital program that we call residential level of care, there's not that many places where you can go and get for mental health only, depression, anxiety, PTSD, somatization disorders, OCD. There's not that many places where you can go and get 30 to 60 days of intensive 5 hours a day of treatment with therapists in a nice supervised residential setting. And so that's what I designed at Honey Lake Clinic. Just like on the addiction model, there's like the 5 days of detox, that's like acute inpatient. And then there's a rehab where you can go to a residential for 30 to 90 days. If you don't have an addiction, it was really hard to find a mental health only situation. So at Honey Lake Clinic, we treat people that have dual diagnoses. So they have an overt chemical addiction, along with depression or PTSD or anxiety disorder. But we also take people that have no addiction. So they might have depression, might have generalized anxiety disorder. PTSD is a frequent diagnosis that we treat there. And so the person comes in, they're there for our average length of stay is around 40 days, ideally 42. Most people are there from 35 to 50 days. Longest is 117 days, sort of a real outlier. We have equine therapy, TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. We do EMDR, art therapy, a bunch of different therapeutic modalities. Everybody is assigned a primary therapist who's a master's or PhD level therapist. They're assigned a psychiatrist or a psychiatric NP. So they have sort of the mind with the therapist, the body with the psychiatrist or psych NP. And then we assign them a pastor. So that's sort of spiritual. And all those 3 disciplines sort of understand the other. So we have this integrated model or this holistic model. We also have a wellness program for diet, nutrition, exercise, meditation, and those kind of things, mindfulness. And we have 6 hours a day of programming. You meet with your individual therapist 3 times a week, which most residentials you only meet once a week, but you meet your individual therapist 3 times a week. So it's much more customized and much more intensive, but you're also in a small process group. So each therapist only has 6 or 7 patients on their caseload, which most have 10, 12, 15 on their caseload. And you have a small process group. So it becomes very intimate and very transparent, very vulnerable, and allows that to happen, so that people can really share what's going on in their unconscious space. A lot of times, especially outpatient, people have a hard time being vulnerable and open and allowing people to see the foundation and the cracks in the foundation, just because they got to go to work right after the session. So they can't be too bared out because they got to get back and have these high level meetings or whatever in their workplace or with their kids and spouse. But when they're with us, they're able to, over the course of the first week, start to trust, be open, realize that it's a non-judgmental, low critique situation. We got 100% Christian staff. Most of our patients are Christian, just loving on each other. So it's an incredible community that allows people just to share, to be open. And it's not a strange thing for us to hear a male usually say, I got sexually molested by my babysitter or by my youth pastor when I was 12 years old. I've never told that to anybody, but I feel safe telling that here. And I realize how much that impacts the decisions I make and all that stuff that's stored there. So we allow this very safe place, and it's just such a healing. I mean, I put in a lot of great programming. We have a lot of great therapists there, and I like to think that our programming is awesome and the therapeutic modalities. But I think half the healing process is really the community and the loving community. Just like in that Lazarus story, that we're called to help each other unbind. And in this community, it's a community that we really get together and help each other unbind in an incredible way, and staff and patients together, whether it's baptisms, whether it's church services that we have, or whether it's a psychoed on attachment theory or emotion management or conflict resolution. There's just a sharing and wow, I think this might be able to help you in that, in that small process group, or, wow, what you said really helpful to me. And a person says, well, you mean I help somebody? You mean I have some value and purpose that I could actually help another person? I thought I was the lowest of the low. So it's incredible what community does. And so we have, great therapeutic modalities. We bring God and Jesus into everything that we do, but we also have this really cool community of people gathering together to really be in that unbinding process and healing process with each other that, is really unique and different.
Well, that's cool. That it sounds like you've got a great team there, and you work in a very holistic way to help people. And if that's the case, I'm assuming that you probably need more people on the team every now and then, like maybe people move on or whatever. Are there any possibilities for any practicum or internship opportunities there at Honey Lake Clinic?
Yes, we had undergrads come down and work a summer as a behavioral health tech, as sort of the front lines. We've had nursing students come. We have need for NPs, nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners. We have many master's level, whether it's social work, LMFTs, or LPCs or LMHCs, depending on the state. I forget what Virginia calls that, licensed professional counselor, master's level designation. But we have both people that are pre-grad getting their hours, practicums or internships, or post-grad, getting their hours towards licensure that have been with us from Liberty. We have a couple of our therapists are people that have, come through the Liberty program and now have been with us I think 4 years now since COVID. Rebecca came down. So Liberty is one of our pipelines, for people that are looking from both undergrad and grad level. Also pastoral students, people in the pastoral, whether we do have an adolescent program for girls, ages 13 to 17. So if people are in seminary in that divinity program and looking for ways to, how do you integrate, how do you understand what's going on science-wise, psychological. As you see in our society, it really comes down to spiritual and psychological health. The Human Flourishing Project with, we have Tyler Vanderwill, working at the Global Center for Flourishing at Liberty, and Harold Koenig and Byron Johnson, and all those studies that are coming out that just say we only have good health when we have good spiritual and psychological health. So if you want exposure to how that's integrated, I went through my schooling all secular. And so I wasn't able to find in psychiatry. It's hard to find, Christian psychiatrists. So I didn't really have Christian mentors. I did have mentors out in UC Irvine in California that were, transcendental meditation. So they were interested in the spiritual, but certainly not the Christian aspect, but encouraged me to explore faith and integration of faith in psychiatric science. But the nice thing at Honey Lake Clinic is that you'll be able to have mentors that oversee, or proctors, or whatever you want to call that person, depending on your discipline, that is guiding you and helping you integrate your faith and your skills as a professional together, which I would have given anything for that to be available to me when I was growing up in my space. But it's great for us to be able to offer that, whether you end up working in Honey Lake Clinic afterwards or go out. We just want to continue to push into that Christian behavioral health space and increase the skill. We're in a spiritual war. The battlefield is the mind. We need more special forces. So, the master's level, PsyD level, PhD level, MD level, those are the special forces that, are in the trenches, that, God has as special ops, in these very difficult situations where people are really suffering, that God wants to send in. But we have a lot of laborers, but not a lot of special force laborers. It's grown, Kenny, and you're around the same age I am. In the beginning of our careers, there wasn't that many, not nearly like there are now, of Christian professionals. So we certainly have made a lot of advances, but we still need a lot more, because the need is huge of how much suffering there is in the world and how much we need the truth imputed into this therapeutic space by bringing the gospel, bringing God, bringing good biblical principle into that healing process in our craft as clinicians.
Absolutely. Well, I suspect that right now there's people listening who are going, wow, this sounds great. I mean, Honey Lake Clinic's doing all this and all these different specialty areas. If people wanted to follow up with you or Honey Lake Clinic, is there a website or an email address or phone number that you would refer people to get in contact with you all down there?
Yeah, so you can call, the best way is to contact me. So my email is Dr. Karl, DrKarl, at drkarlbenzio.com. So Dr. Karl, DrKarl, at drkarlbenzio.com. Email me and I'll put you in a connection with our HR department or the people that oversee, whether you're master's level, our clinical director, or our medical director, if you're MD in the medical school or PsyD programs, I'll connect you to the right people, nursing wise or whatever. You can also follow me on all the different social medias at Dr. Karl Benzio, DrKarlBenzio. A lot of different videos and educational things I do on especially TikTok, Instagram, to help you advance and move forward. You go look at our website, honeylakeclinic.com, and look at the success stories in the About Us, just to get an idea of what's available, as you're moving forward in your space as a clinician. God's going to bless you to be on the front lines and to have a front row seat of just amazing comeback stories that he's going to write for various different people. And just to see some of those comeback stories, I think will encourage you and excite you to move forward in this space. There's a lot of beatdown sometimes for psychiatry, and psychology, and this behavioral health space. We're sort of like the stepchild of the medical, specialties. We're sort of growing in importance, and people are realizing, wow, we need that expertise. But sometimes it's a very isolating profession. So to be able to see some of those success stories, see some of the people that you can work with and be part of, I think is just encouraging, especially for you grad students out there or undergrad students that might be listening and watching this.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, we are getting near that time to wrap up, but before we wrap up, I always try to ask everyone, it's sort of a last question, catch-all question. Is there anything else you wanted to share today with the listeners? Maybe something God might have put on your heart or mind to sort of wrap things up with? And any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, in your personal lives, to me, Isaiah 26:3 is my life verse. So Isaiah 26:3 is, he gives him perfect peace whose mind is fixed on thee, because he trusts you. And in the world we live in, coming out of COVID, coming out of election, stress, economy, wars, Israel, all kind of hectic stuff going on. We live in a very stressed society. And to me, the merry-go-round of life just spins faster and faster. And when I was a kid, we had these roundabouts on the playground, and the big kids would spin them, and then they'd stop it, and you'd get off, and you'd be dizzy and disoriented, and some kids would throw up, and you can't walk a straight line, you're off course. And to me, that's what the merry-go-round of life does to us. It gets us disoriented, overwhelmed, nauseous, sick. We're off course unless we fix our eyes on a stationary point. So the ones that, whether they be a ballet dancer, figure skater, or on that roundabout, if you fix your gaze on a pavilion or a tree or the water fountain, you don't get dizzy. And in life, everything is movable except God. And so if we fix our mind on him, we're not going to get disoriented. There's a lot of imposters out there. There's a lot of facsimiles that sort of draw our attention or say, hey, no, over here is peace, but it really doesn't. So I would just encourage you to, whether it's in your devotional time, whether it's your Bible study, whether it's your church family, your connection with God, how to keep on a regular basis each day reminders of keep your mind focused on him. That's where you're going to have your perfect peace, to have that trust. The other thing I would throw out is Philippians 4:13. So Philippians 4:13 is, to me, the most misapplied verse. And it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And, I'm an athlete. I love to play sports and ball. I'm never going to dunk a basketball anymore. I can't bring anybody back from the dead. I can't play for the Duke basketball team. But how does this verse work? And to me, if we look at earlier in Philippians 4, like starting at verse 3, don't be anxious. Think of these good things. Think of what's true and rich. Give your things over to God. He goes through a list of sort of mindful psychological commands and encouragements or charges, and it's all about the mind. And then he says, I can do all these things. And I think he said, I can do all things. I think he's saying, I can do all these things that I just told you in these prior 10 verses, because they're all things that we have control over with our mind. And so I would encourage you all to, whatever that psychological investment that you want to make in yourself is, whether that's a daily, use spears to unpack, do a psychological autopsy on a decision that I made that day that, wasn't helpful, wasn't beneficial, was it a wrong decision or a sin? Well, let me do a psychological autopsy on that and see, well, why did I make that decision? Why did I choke? Why did I deny Christ in that particular situation whenever I just said earlier in the day, I'll never deny you. So whatever that psychological exploration that you can do, especially into that unconscious space, so you can understand what's going on in your black box up here to make decisions, because it isn't a black box. God will reveal it. The Holy Spirit will show you the mind of Christ and how you can get out of the way and be a good steward of this Spirit's process in the decisions you make. And oh my gosh, you'll be amazed at where God takes you in your life as you honor him with your decisions. He'll give you a tremendous opportunity to be blessed.
Absolutely. Well, we are at that time, so I hate to say it, but we got to wrap it up. Thank you, though, Karl, for being on the program. I really do appreciate it. And I want to say, too, thank you for being a good example and witness for the Lord in the psychiatry field. I know, like you said, there's not that many Christian psychiatrists, and I just think there's such a need for people in all of these different fields to be a witness for the Lord and to bring that truly holistic healing to people's lives. So really appreciate that. And thank you for being on the program.
Well, hey, thank you, Kenyon. I appreciate your leadership at Liberty with the behavioral health sciences departments and all the things you do. And it's been a pleasure. And thanks. And I've enjoyed our relationship over the years. Appreciate it. And hope the listeners got something out of this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again. And thank you, listeners, for joining us here today. We appreciate it. And we look forward to you joining us next time here in the Mental Healthy Podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in this episode or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.